welcome back to another episode of History is Full of Inspirational Women that I wish I'd been taught about in school. Now, I started this entire series really because of one group of women that went to the absolute limits of human endurance to win women the right to vote. Now, the women I am of course talking about are the suffragettes. Now, so many books came out last year, so many documentaries and exhibitions all about the suffragettes. But there's one figure, one quite high-profile figure, that's noticeably missing from all of these. And that person is Princess Sophia Duleep Singh. Now, one book has come out about her this year by Anita Anand, which I'll just show you now. Now, this is absolutely worth a read if at the end of this you'd like to know a little bit more about Sophia. So, Princess Sophia Duleep Singh was the granddaughter of the Lion of the Punjab, one of the most famous 19th century Indian rulers. Now, his son, the Maharaja Duleep Singh, was Sophia's father, but he was forced away to sign his kingdom off at the age of 11 due to pressures from the British. He was then brought over to England and he became a bit of a favourite of Queen Victoria. She often referred to him as my beautiful boy. In fact, Queen Victoria and Duleep Singh were so close in the early years of him being in England that Sophia Duleep Singh's godmother is in fact Queen Victoria. Yet another strange reason why we don't know a little bit more about her as a person. Now, in early life, Sophia had a bit of an up and down childhood, so obviously she was very lucky compared to a lot of Victorian children, but her father was a bit of a philanderer, couldn't live within his means. They ended up moving from house to house. She had a very disruptive education and she didn't really learn politics at an early age. She was more into her dogs and her dog training. Now, all of that changed on a visit to India. Now, before this, Sophia was a little bit of a socialite, and we can see her in her prime in this picture here of her coming out ball. It's just here, there we are. So this here, that is Princess Sophia with her two sisters Catherine and Bamba, and that is at their coming out debutante ball, obviously very common amongst aristocratic women in Victorian times. So there we are. She lived in quite a nice house. This is Faraday House, that's part of Hampton Court. It was known as a Grace and Favour apartment. This was common at Hampton Court, members of the aristocracy that had fallen on hard times being given these Grace and Favour bits of accommodation. So Sophia had a life of parties and socialising and lovely balls and being asked to dance, and she found it reasonably fulfilling. She used to sleep till noon, have breakfast on a silver tray. But then she went to India for the first time and she saw poverty and suffering on a mass scale for the first time, and at that point she became politicised. Her first campaign when she moved back to Britain was to help a group of men called Lascars, which I very much hope I'm pronouncing right. They're groups of Indian rural workers that were brought over to the UK and terribly exploited. They were used to unload vessels coming from India and from other places in the British Empire, and they were treated absolutely appallingly. So they were lashed, they were whipped. There's one instance of a Lascar having been whipped so hard that they knocked out their front teeth, so it was really hideous. And Sophia raised lots of money for accommodation and better pay and lots of campaigns for these people. But after a while she began to run out of steam and needed a new project, and that is when she joined the suffragette movement. Now, she really was very actively involved in this. She was involved in the Black Friday protest that was in 1908 when suffragettes planned a storm of the House of Commons but ended up being treated really horrifically and brutally by the police, often in a sexual manner as well. There's a very famous picture of what became known as Black Friday. Just here you can see a suffragette being thrown to the ground by police. So Sophia was involved in that. She took on a police officer directly that was assaulting her friend, chased after him even though she was 5'0", took his number and then complained about him directly to the authorities, who proceeded to do absolutely nothing about it, of course. Winston Churchill was no friend to the suffragettes. She was also part of the Tax Resistance League, which meant women did not pay tax until they were represented in Parliament. Fair enough. So she refused to pay her dog licence and her carriage licence until bailiffs came to her house and took her jewellery. It was then auctioned off, but who bought it? other suffragettes and then gave it back to Sophia, which I think is pretty marvellous. She also put her name forward for all the advertising, so when the suffragettes did cake sales and jam sales, they put "made by a princess" on and stuff like that. Despite being quite debilitatingly shy and hating public speaking, she was always at the very front. She sat herself down with Emmeline Pankhurst and all the other leading suffragettes and put her name and her face forward, despite this being quite terrifying for her. So, in conclusion, Sophia was a truly remarkable person. She was involved in so many acts of direct militancy, throwing herself on the Prime Minister's car on one occasion. So why don't we know about her? Well, she was never actually arrested and never imprisoned, so therefore never had the opportunity to go on hunger strike, which is what the suffragettes are mainly known for. Now, the reason behind this is probably because she was an aristocrat. She was a very high class. It would be considered really embarrassing for the authorities to have to arrest somebody of that class. So that's probably why we don't know so much about her. But here she is, immortalised outside Hampton Court, selling the Suffragette newspaper in the early 20th century. She went on to be a nurse in World War I, and then she had a godchild, the child of her housekeeper, whom she continued to hammer home the key values of the suffragettes to, because she was so young, so impressionable. So, in conclusion, Sophia is someone that deserves our complete and unending respect. A shy woman with a pretty difficult background, with her father being the Maharaja, her mother being the daughter of a slave, all of the difficulties that came with her childhood being so disrupted. She really turned that into becoming so politicised and supporting the suffragettes in a truly active and formidable way. So thank you very much for listening, and read Anita Annan's book if you want to know more about her, because it's so gripping. It's absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much, and join me again next time.